Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is distract. Let's take a moment and review some of the definitions for this verb. The first way you might hear or see distract used means to prevent someone from giving full attention to something. And a second definition you might encounter is to divert attention from something. Both of these first two definitions have a fairly negative meaning to them. So in each of these, right, we sort of either believe or think, right, attention should be on something, but there's something else. Maybe that is causing us to change our focus, or maybe there's something not allowing us to give that full attention or focus to something. We're going to see several examples of that a little bit later as we discuss this particular verb. Now, the third definition is similar, but I want us to note that it has a more positive meaning. It's to divert one's attention from something worrying or something that's unpleasant by doing something else. That's very different. Maybe it's even fun or pleasurable. So again, I hope you can see here the very positive meaning, right? And maybe you've had this particular experience. There is something that is worrying you, something that's concerning you. Maybe you can't really or it doesn't feel like you can stop thinking about it, right? So you're going to try and take your attention to something else. At this moment, it's important to know that distract is a regular verb. You can make the progressive form of this verb by just adding ing. That forms distracting. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb distract ends in a T sound. This means when we add the ed ending, we're going to add an extra syllable to the verb. So our ed ending is making an id sound. Id. Right? So the past tense and the participle form of the verb should sound like this. Distracted. Distracted. Okay? There really aren't other phrasal verbs that we need to study right now, so we're going to move on. And today I thought it might be nice, instead of talking about a particular verb tense, we would focus on a modal verb. So today we're going to look at several examples of giving advice. And there are three primary ways that we give advice in English, or sort of three grammatical constructions. They're all a bit similar, but you're going to notice kind of a strengthening as we move through this video. So let's start with our first way to give advice. It's with the modal should. Okay? So whenever we make sentences, we think it's a good idea for a person to do an action. Right? We're going to start with our subject, use should, and then use the base verb. Here's an example. You should distract yourself while waiting for your test results. Right? So here, maybe someone's kind of thinking of that third definition. They know their friend is maybe a little worried. Maybe it's a family member who's feeling a bit anxious, right? So they're giving this advice, right? Do something pleasurable. Do something fun that takes your mind off of this, like, did I do well? Did I not do well? Okay. Now, we can also give what's termed negative advice, right? So here we're telling someone it's not a good idea to do a particular action. Okay. So for negative sentences, we're going to start with our subject, right? We're going to use should not, or you might see the contraction shouldn't, and then again, you'll see the base verb. Here's an example. The country's renewable surge shouldn't distract us from its many environmental policy failures. Okay? So this was sort of advice from one writer who I thought it would be best if we just didn't name a country here, not to cause any troubles. But what they were trying to suggest is, like, here's something that might take our focus away from all of the problems, all of the failures that have occurred, right? So we've kind of like got to still pay attention to these other issues. Don't have that attention pulled away. Finally, you can ask yes or no questions to people, right? You're essentially asking for their opinion. Do you think this is a good idea? Here's an example of that. Should we distract Dad while he's on the phone? So here's our construction. You see should, then you see your subject, and then the base verb, right? So this maybe is one child talking to another, right? Kind of wondering, is this a good idea? Okay. Now let's move to a little stronger kind of advice, right? So we're moving past just it's a good idea, right, into like, no, really, this is something that almost to the point of like needs to be done. Okay. Here, what you're going to notice is that we only have an affirmative in this next category. It's with what's sometimes called a semimodal. It's ought to and the base verb. So O-U-G-H-T, ought can sound like a funny word, but that's the pattern you're going to see. Now, a special note about ought to. If you listen to a lot of people who only speak English, rarely do you hear them say those two words kind of individually. You ought to, right? More commonly, it's going to sound like one word. And I've written what it sounds like down at the bottom of my example. It's oughta. You oughta. Oughta. Okay? Means exactly the same thing. We've just linked the two words together and sort of blended the sounds. And many times we're doing this to speak more quickly. So let's look at an example of this. Smokers ought to distract themselves by chewing gum or drinking water until the desire to smoke passes, right? Again, this is advice, right? We're telling someone, right, take your focus from that desire to smoke, right, and do these other things. Now let's go to the last way that we give advice. It's with or using the words had, better, and then the base verb. Okay? We can do affirmative or negative sentences with this. And when we use had better, what we're suggesting is if this advice is not followed, there are going to be consequences. There are going to be bad results that follow not doing this particularly recommended action. So let's take a look at a couple examples. We had better distract the kids while they bring in the presents, right? So maybe someone's saying this near a birthday or holiday that involves gift giving. But if the kids see this, right, they're going to want the things immediately. Maybe they'll be crying and tantrums and, right, those are the consequences, right? So we need them to shift their focus away so they don't see maybe presents coming into the house. Now let's take a look at a negative. Okay, so here our pattern's going to be subject, had better not, and then the base verb. Okay, so maybe you're driving, right? And you have a friend who's like, hey, look at my phone, or I don't know, they're touching you, trying to make you laugh, right? You're going to warn them. You had better not distract me while I'm driving, right? What's the consequence here, right? We could be in an accident. We could hurt ourselves. We could hurt other people on the road. Okay, so I hope you can see how that advice gets a little stronger with each of those examples. Now let's spend a moment talking about some words that are related to our verb distract. And the first word we're going to look at is the noun form of this word, distraction. This noun refers to a thing that prevents someone from giving their full attention to something else. And I should note, I think a person could also prevent someone else from giving their full attention. So the best example of this definition, I think, is our phones are huge distractions. I know I'm guilty of this, where I've had family or loved ones trying to talk to me about something, right? And my phone has taken my attention because I've received a message or I saw something that caught caught my eye. So, best illustration, I think, of that word. Related to that, I also want you to know that distracting is an adjective. And so we're going to use this to describe something that causes or prevents one from being able to concentrate, or it causes someone to divert their attention or change their focus. So, an example of this: the noise is so distracting, right? So, the noise is causing that particular feeling. Another adjective that can easily be confused is the adjective distracted. Okay? The difference between ing adjectives and ed adjectives is, again, that idea of what causes a feeling. That's your ing. And then the ed is the person has the feeling. So when we use distracted as an adjective, we're saying we have the feeling of being unable to concentrate because our mind is preoccupied. Our mind is on something else. An example of this: there are way too many distracted drivers on our roads. So again, phones many times are the culprit of that. Another related word you might encounter is the adverb distractingly. Here, we're either describing a verb that's being done in a distracting way, or we could be describing another adjective as well. So, an example of this: the movie was distractingly inconsistent, right? So, this particular sentence came from a review, and in the review, the writer found that in the first part of the movie, it seemed like it was a drama, then it was kind of a comedy, then it seemed like a horror film, and then it was back to comedy, and I thought, like, this is so inconsistent, I can't really focus and I can't pay attention to what is happening. One more word for us today, it's the adjective distractible. So when we use this word as an adjective, we're describing someone or something that can be easily distracted. An example of this: all kindergarten students are highly distractible, right? It's easy to take their focus away from one activity and move on to something, right? That's a little bit of the function of their age, and their ability to focus, which is another reason I love teaching adults. They can be distractible, but not as badly as 5 and 6-year-olds. I want to thank everybody for watching today's video, and I hope you have a wonderful day.